Let me just a moment so that our live stream is active, because we know a lot of folks are going to be joining us online, and we'll go ahead and get started. We'll have some coffee in the back at the end of the presentation. We'd hope to have it ready sooner, but I didn't turn the hot water on in time. So that's you can blame me if you're not caffeinated enough this morning. If you've not been in our building before and need washrooms, I know some faces, I don't know everybody. You can walk right out these double doors and to the left, and then down the hall on the right, you'll see a single-use restroom that you can use. Okay, great. All right, well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all this morning. Thank you for coming out. If you're here in our building, if you're with us online, we're glad that you're with us as well. One of the things that we do every time we gather in community in this space is remind ourselves that at Silver Spring United Methodist Church, we seek to be a movement of Christ's love, feeding people mind, body, and spirit so that none go hungry. And this project that we're undertaking now as we discern whether or not God is calling us to build affordable housing on our property is an outgrowth of that our commitment to work to feed people mind, body, and spirit. So welcome. We're glad you're here. I want to take just a moment before we begin our presentation to remind those of you who've been with us during this process what exactly it is we're doing, where we are in the process, and what our next steps will be. I also want to take a moment to share with you some interesting statistics about our building, just to kind of help you begin to understand some of the complexities of the moment, the season our congregation finds itself in. So first, where we are in the process. The process that we've undertaken over the last almost now 12 weeks, with the help of our Vision team, some of whom are here. If you're a member of the Vision team, if you'll raise your hand. So we've got three of our folks over here that are with us today. Is to begin to understand what it is that God is calling us to do as it relates to our building, which is a big old barn, as we like to say, and as we seek to try to secure our witness here on this corner, serving our community. That 12-week process has involved 3 presentations, one on the financial impact of the potential project, one on the social impact, and this presentation now on the design impact. The goal of this process is not to actually dig down deep into the weeds, right? We're not actually laying bricks and mortar yet. We're simply trying to understand from a 30,000-foot view what some of the questions, challenges, options, and opportunities are as we seek to develop affordable housing if we decide to do so. At the end of this 12-week process, there will be a congregational vote that's going to take place on June 4th, where professing members of the congregation will vote on whether or not we want to proceed with pursuing development. That doesn't mean we're going to develop, it doesn't mean that we're signing a development agreement, and it doesn't mean that we'll have blueprints. What that means is the congregation will then empower a building committee who will be our official representatives in engaging with developers and working with architects and beginning to figure out what the bricks and mortar of the vision that we're now kind of capturing is. So let me say, there's not going to be a shovel in the ground for several years at the very earliest, if there's a shovel in the ground at all. We're not going to know what the building is going to look like. for at least another 12 months. Right? We're not going to know exactly what it is we're doing until that building committee has the chance to engage with the developer, and we'll continue through them to engage with the community association. So that's where we are right now. We don't know exactly. We're simply trying to see, as Scripture says, in a mirror dimly, what God is calling us to do. So, some interesting statistics on our building and what brought us to this point. In 2021, this congregation had another campus that it sold on University Boulevard. It was originally Marvin Memorial United Methodist Church, and we were able to take the proceeds from that sale and begin to understand from a holistic perspective what the current needs were in this campus. What that revealed is the building needs somewhere between $9 and $17 million. That's a big shift, I know, it's a big gap. Somewhere between $9 and $17 million to repair critical infrastructure systems. So that's not accessibility, it's not beautification, it's not asbestos abatement or anything like that. It's simply repairing our HVAC system, repairing our electrical systems, replacing our roofs, and making sure that our fire safety systems actually work, because right now, they don't. That then meant that we had to get creative about how we were going to move forward. We don't have the funds on hand to be able to do that work, and we're committed to trying to stay on this corner serving our community for years to come. Our annual conference, which is the judicatory that this congregation belongs to, offered to provide a free, affordable housing feasibility study to help us understand whether or not there was a missionally aligned way that we could stay in this building, secure some of the funds that we need to be able to make some of these repairs, and continue serving our community. That's what's led us to this point. So, some interesting statistics about building use as we think about what we might do with the current footprint of our building and our property. So this building is about 196,000 square feet. It's a large place. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to invite you all to join me on a tour, and I'll actually walk you through some of the spaces that we're talking about. Now, while it's 196,000 square feet, since September of 2022, there are 25 rooms in this building that have not been used at all by anybody, ever. Rooms that were heating and cooling and keeping the lights on in. On a weekly basis, approximately 20% of our building, including that belongs to Spring Knolls that we rent to, is used more than 2 hours per day. So what that means is we're heating and cooling 80% of a building that we're not using on a regular basis. Does that make sense? Okay. On Sunday mornings pre-pandemic, this congregation occupied roughly 43% of our building. So this is pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, that number is closer to 25%. So we're actively, as a congregation, not spaces we're renting to other people, occupying about 25% of our current footprint. Currently, there are 23 rooms, approximately comprising 23,000 square feet, that are dedicated to a specific purpose and that are only used 1 day per week, like our sanctuary. Generally, occasionally there are events, but on the whole, there's 26,000 square feet that we're using once, maybe twice a week. Of the 196,000 approximate square feet, roughly 18% is dedicated to equipment and maintenance. So air handlers, boilers, electrical rooms, all those scary places you're going to get to see on this tour. Roughly 15% of our building is dedicated for storage. That's closet space, that's janitorial space, that's hallways that are now storage space. And of the three largest spaces in our building, the sanctuary, the gymnasium, and the fellowship hall, those spaces are only used for a combined 20 hours per week. So we're talking about, again, heating, cooling, keeping lights on in spaces that we occupy for only 20 hours a week. And what that means for us as a congregation is that we are spending a lot of money, roughly $400,000 a year, on utilities that could be used to help better serve our community. So these are some of the conversations that we're having that are informing questions about design. I'm going to introduce now Michael Weincheck, who is an architect that has graciously come alongside our vision team to begin to help us understand what might be possible to lead us through this conversation on design impact. So Michael?
Thank you, Will. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try not to talk from there because I have to see my screen to push the buttons. But today I want to talk a little bit about your site, talk about the zoning that you have today and what zoning might be required to add any development to the site. walk you through some of the site constraints and challenges and actually major opportunities. Talk about where you might want to develop and what scale that might happen. But there's a lot of variables in all of this, and I'll try to show you the thought process that we've put in to show you the various places. It doesn't mean that we would select or you would want to build in all of the places I'm going to show you today. It just means that those are our opportunity points. And then I'm going to share with you a similar project that we've completed just recently in Washington, D.C., which includes a historic building. It includes multifamily mid-rise. It includes home ownership components. And it fit within a significant existing community. And we did this major learning and visioning process with the community to make sure that what ended the result of the process was in keeping with the community, and actually had neighbors coming to our zoning hearings and giving their support to the process. So let me just jump in quickly. Oh, a little closer? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I tend to have a scratchy voice. So it's very hard to show you. It's maybe if some people wanted to move closer, but this is your site. And I do have a laser on here. So your site, there's the church in Georgia, and First Street, and then you're surrounded by parking. But the main parking area, the main parking area over here, because it leads directly into the church most easily. And then that's the educational wing. And then you're surrounded by homes, townhomes, and some other homes over here. I move to the next slide and show you. So right now you're zoned as R60, which is what the rest of the community around you is zoned other than the townhomes here. And then the building over here is already rezoned. It's a county building. It's already zoned to what's called CRT2. You can see it up there. T0.5, R2, and 875. So all those numbers come down to mean that if you wanted to put it in commercial, retail, and transit-oriented, you could do it 2 times FAR, which I'll explain in a moment. Or if you do a residential building, you could do up to a 2 times FAR. And H means that the maximum height that you could build on the site would be 75 feet. Doesn't mean you have to build 75 feet, but that's the maximum you could build. The way that's measured depends on a lot of things because you sit bordering 3 different streets. What we would most likely do would be choose Georgia Avenue as your measuring point so that it has the least impact on the neighborhood. And as you can see, your existing lot size is 164,000 square feet plus or minus, which is 3.77 acres. And so with a maximum FAR of 2, FAR is you can build, if you count all the floors that are above grade, so your basement in this building does not count, you could build in total of all those floors above grade can equal 2 times the 164,000, which is 328,000 square feet potentially. Well, Will mentioned that you've got a very large building. Only about 62,000 of the existing building counts towards the existing FAR. And so you subtract that out. And so there's a potential to develop on this site up to 266,000 square feet, less anything we might take down. However, while a private developer may want to come in and do that on a site, I think we've worked with your visioning group, and to go to that density would be very impactful in the neighborhood. So what we've tried to look at is what's actually reasonable that meets the mission and doesn't overburden the site or the neighborhood. So just one point on this, the reason we're choosing to try to go to the CRT 2 and 875 is because you can't do what's called spot zoning. You can't just sort of elect a zone and say, hey, this zone makes sense to me. You have to use a zone that you're close to. You have to have some continuity, because the planning departments in Montgomery County and everywhere want to make sure that there's some hierarchy to how the developments work. So the only zone that you have going for you really is this beige area right here that is a CRT. The zone down here where the old park and planning building, they actually have up to 125 feet in height available for them. And there would be an outside chance that we could have thought about using that, but again, we think that would be too much of an impact on the beautiful community that you sit in. So hopefully you can see this. This is your existing site, George at the bottom, First at the top, with the church shown, the grades, the existing residents, right in here, and then the parking areas and the driveways. And I wanted to go through the program that we've been talking about, just to make sure that everybody's aware of what we're trying to get to. Because again, while a lot of market rate developers would come in here, maybe put a condo building or a condo and a rental building, and it would probably be high end with only 12 to 15% affordable housing in it. Because of your location and the church's mission, we're trying to look at doing mostly either 100% affordable or a mixed income building, putting workforce housing and affordable housing into it. So, of course, we want to retain the sanctuary, retain the beautiful chapel that you have over across the cloister, some of the offices. You've got a gym, which I assume you all know. It's underground right here, and it pokes up in above the grade there, which to replicate a gym would cost a lot. So we want to try to save that as a great amenity for not only you, but the surrounding community. A portion of the educational wing, as Pastor Will mentioned, a good portion of the educational wing is not utilized anymore, and that gives us some opportunity to potentially either look at reusing that or taking it down and developing a little bit taller structure there. The daycare facility is a great income producer, and it's a great amenity for the neighborhood. You've got some nice site amenities, which we want to enhance. And then we also have to make sure that we recognize parking for you and anything that's built. And then the new uses that we're talking about is a multifamily rental housing, which would be affordable family housing, most likely in what's called a mid-rise building, which is, say, 4 to 7 stories. At 75 feet, the maximum we could fit on this site would be 7 stories. I'll talk about how that impacts the neighborhood in a moment. Supportive housing, which are smaller units, and supportive housing are for people who have been unfortunate enough to be either in a homeless situation or have some disability issues, and they need supportive services to live in a community successfully. And so not only do you have the units, but you have supportive housing offices where you've got people offering services to those people. A potential for transitional housing as well, although that's something that would need to be talked through because of the way that's funded. But transitional housing allows people who have been in, say, a bad housing situation with a loved one and need to move to a temporary place to get stabilized and then move on. And a lot of that in our communities that include transitional housing means that they come into that and then they actually move into the building typically. And then potential for intergenerational. While family housing is very important to your visioning group, we've talked a little bit about intergenerational housing, where you might have some senior housing implemented in this as well. And so, you know, what you normally see these days is a senior building and a family building. The industry, but my firm has been doing a lot of intergenerational housing in the recent past because there's a lot of synergies, and you don't need to make like a segregated tower or wing that's for the seniors. They can intermingle in the community, and everybody offers a lot of service and potential to the other residents. But the visioning community also said, look, we want to have home ownership as well. We want to make sure that, you know, there's people in Montgomery County, if you're economically disadvantaged, have almost no chance to move into a home ownership unit unless you have a group that will work with the funding, work with their land prices to offer that. So we'll be talking about the potential for that, which would typically happen in townhomes, either normal townhomes with, you know, maybe 2 stories, or what's called 2-over-2s, which I'll show you images of later in the presentation. That's where you have what's essentially a 4-story unit, where the first 2 stories are one unit, and then there's a stair that goes up, and the second 2 stories above that are another unit. The reason for that is it gets you in the same piece of land, it gets 2 people getting home ownership. So it's really a great way to take advantage of a site without overcrowding the site or using too much of the site with the very low density housing and not meeting a mission. And then we need to have associated uses, supportive houses, supportive services for the residents in the community, amenity and meeting spaces, management office, you know, potentially some other common uses to replace some of the uses in this building if necessary, and then parking, and definitely an arrival area. When we start looking at the site, you'll see that making this building, anything that you could build in this property, have its own sense of place and being without crowding the church or tearing down significant portions is a challenge. I'm sorry, I have a neurological tremor that gets worse when I speak. So I wanted to do a couple analyses to talk you through our thought process on this. You know, we've heard from the community that there's a desire to have reduced traffic along First Street. One of the reasons this access point, it originally wasn't designed in that shape, but one of the reasons it was changed to that shape, I believe, is to try to reduce potential cut-through traffic. And so one of the things that we talk with the visioning community about is making sure that we don't design anything or propose anything in here that would cause people to cut through. I live in a community between Wisconsin and Connecticut, and even though it's signed and there's police there all the time, it's amazing how many people cut through our community. We need to retain and enhance at least some of the existing parking. And the part that makes the most sense right now would be the part that is right out here, which serves the existing sanctuary and the main portions of the church itself. Anything that we would do, because we have a curb cut existing on Georgia, it's very easy to either maintain that or slightly relocate that. So that, you know, just knowing what we know about what DDOT might want for that, would be probably only a right in, right out on that. It would not be, they wouldn't give you a cut through the median to be able to go, I guess it's north on Georgia. And so, you know, so those are some of the opportunities and challenges for the traffic. there's some interesting elements to the site as well. There's an 8 to 11 foot grade change from where you enter this building to the back portion of the site. And actually even up towards First Street, which these arrows are trying to show you. So one of the interesting things about that is that any buildings that we put in here, if we keep them starting out essentially approximately the same floor level as the church, we actually will say I did build a 7-story building, which I'm not proposing, would be it'll reduce the height of the apparent building along First Street by 1 story to 1.5 stories, depending on how we set the grade. So we're always trying to take advantage of that kind of thing when we're working in an existing neighborhood. There's as I mentioned before, the gym sits here, and it has this roof area that comes off of these classrooms. And from the original drawings, which we've got a portion of, it's clear that that was intended to be used, and it was designed to take a live load. So it can be used as a terrace area, or even a big screen porch, or something that could be a great amenity for the church itself. And then I sort of grayed out that this portion of the existing educational wing and potentially the house here are elements that might want to be removed to allow for some development, to open up the site so that we don't have to push the development too close to the residential here, too close to the residential there, or even too close to the residential up at the top. I should mention that there's a 40-foot setback here and a 35-foot setback here along First. So that's going to keep anything that would be proposed well away from the residential across the street. Anything we do, we want to make sure it doesn't impact the scale of those units. And so in the next slides, where I start to talk about areas where you might be able to build, I've made the assumption that we want to save the gym, and there's some classrooms in front of the gym or above the gym and on both stories in front of the gym, as well as this chapel is while this sanctuary is amazing, your chapel is amazing as well. I really think that plus the cloister plus this element, it's what makes this church so vibrant. So, but the idea of taking those down would allow us to open up some land to make the right decisions with development. So what this slide starts to do is just point out places where development could happen and talk about things that would, some concepts that we think would be important to make sure that it has the least impact on the community and retains your parking and access. So, as I said, we want to stop the cut-through traffic. So potentially, we would be putting a building along here that could help us stop that traffic. There's an area here up at the front where we could put residential as well. And then there's areas here. And these light blue areas are what we call low-rise development. Probably would be segregated from any other multifamily building. And it would be either 2/2s or single height townhomes. One of the big reasons for it is, along Georgia, you don't want to put something here that's going to compete with the view of the church. The church has a great presence on Georgia. It's iconic. It's a landmark for people who come in. Along here, while the setback line along this side is only about 10 feet, we think that because there's residents right here, that it would make sense to put, if you were going to put anything in here, put townhome development which is lower in scale, push that down into the grade, as I mentioned. But also, if it's townhomes, we need to have some rear yards to it, and so that sets us even further away from the adjacent residential. There's also a thing called bulk plane analysis, which is from an existing residential community. You have to look at the diagonal height of things. And so it makes sense to have that kind of positioning of this so that you don't get to be too high and have the bulk plane be absorbed. Along First Street, it makes sense to us that you could have some townhouse development along there, either 1 or 2 stories. Then the darker color is where you might have potential mid-rise. And there's an area through here that makes sense for that. But again, we looked at, do you want to put a mid-rise over here? No, bulk plane analysis plus existing development. Do you want to have it push up against First Street? No, because we want to be respectful of the neighbors. Do we want to push it all the way over to the property line and setbacks over here? Again, we'd be right in their, these people's backyards. Plus, this existing parking lot, the at-grade parking lot, really makes a lot of sense to be retained. So there's only a sort of a limited area where mid-rise development is going to make any sense. Another place that we could make it work would be either to take this pod and bring it out, or maybe even have a mid-rise element that comes along here, and you'll see a project at the end of the presentation that we've embedded townhomes into a mid-rise so that it helps you step back the mass. So, you know, say we went to 75 feet. Potentially what you would do is you'd make maybe this area up to here be 75 feet, maybe this, or the 7 stories from here, it would read as 5.5 from here. But then maybe this portion of any mid-rise, which is stepped back, could be at, say, a 5-story element, which again would appear to be 3.5 to the neighbors across First Street. So those are some of the, the potentials. There's also a concept of, do we want to actually allow a drive-through connection to what is either an opportunity for a nice common area or for access to the building. So this whole study, and it's not saying that all these pieces would need to be built, it's just looking at where it makes sense to build each type of development. Any questions so far? Just have really one more slide, which I'm going to manipulate a little bit. So what we did on this slide is that, you got to have an arrival. And one of the first thoughts we had was, well, geez, any building you put here, an arrival would be sort of nice to have a drop-off along First Street. It's a natural space. But that puts traffic on First Street. It makes First Street the focal point of this new development, and we didn't think that's appropriate, especially with the comments from the neighbors. You don't want to bring people through your parking lots to try to get to it. So what makes a lot of sense is to create this right in, right out along Georgia and bring a connector up, block the access with common green space, maybe have an arrival drop-off that serves townhomes and maybe the mid-rise. Put the plaza back on top of the gym area. Create some green space here and here, but I was thinking this makes a nice space for the daycare play space. There's a beautiful tree there that shades it. And one of the issues then is, how do we get enough parking? Well, because of the way grade works and because we would be taking down a portion of the existing building, part of this is already excavated. And so there's a great opportunity to have an access point over here that drops down into below grade parking, probably just one level, so it's relatively inexpensive to build, and also allow church traffic to enter as well. So we've got a lot of buildings where we've got multiple uses in them. And so we can segregate the parking with gates and internal gates so that there would be the church area, and then there would be the residential area parking. So if you did something like this with all these pieces of development, which is probably the maximum that anyone would look at doing here, you know, we might do 2 over 2 townhomes here. Because the way the grade works, that makes some sense. Along here, I think 2 over 2 townhomes may feel a little bit tall to the First Street residents. So maybe those are what we call embedded townhomes, where they actually are 2 stories, but they're pushed into the first 2 stories of any multifamily building you might build. Have a drop-off here with an entrance to, say, up to 5 stories here, up to 7 stories here. We'd have to talk a lot with you and the neighbors and really think about, you know, what's the right potentials there. And then have the garage sit underneath of the development there. So there's embedded townhomes of 8 to 12 along the front. Multifamily, if we did this T that I've shown here, we could develop between 100 and 142 units in there, depending, that's done through an analysis of square footage. And that depends on how much is 5 stories, how much, at the low end, everything's 4 or 5 stories. At the upper end, part of it is at, say, 7 stories, but again, we try to keep that in. And so that would give you a total development on the site of 120 to 170 units, if you did something like this. That equates to about 180,000 square feet. As you saw at the beginning of the presentation, we can, a market rate developer would come in here and put in 260, 280 units. So, you know, this is a gentle approach. We could be more aggressive, we could be less aggressive. Each of these elements could be moved, but as you see, there's not major opportunities. You know, as I said, we really don't want to put anything over here. We don't want to put anything high over here. You know, we don't want to ruin the viewpoint here. We don't want to get rid of the chapel. We don't want to get rid of the gym. So it sort of pushes you into these elements. So the site sort of starts to solve itself. You know, logic is always the best planning process. And really making that logic work with the surrounding community. And then parking-wise, we have 60 to 70 existing at grade parking spaces. We would probably look at putting some parking here between these beautiful trees you have down here, because there is that entrance to the lower sanctuary area, which you know, needs some parking, especially for accessibility down there. And then at grade residential, there's an opportunity, if we had, say, an entrance along here, there's an opportunity to put some parking here. One of the interesting things is there's a major slope up to the townhomes, you've probably noticed. So anything we put there would be below the viewscape for those townhomes, so we wouldn't be impacting them much at all. And then we could fit in this area below the building between 130, 145 and 165 spaces. And that would be relegated in that I just did some calculations based on the number of seats. So we'd have 60 to 70 on, for the church and 35 to 45 for the church and the garage. So there'd be somewhere over 100 spaces potentially available for the church. And then there'd be between 120 and 140 spaces for the residential. One thing to note on parking for the residential, you know, current regulations for this zone would say you need to have 1.5 spaces per unit. But Montgomery County and every jurisdiction in the area is starting to really push down their parking ratios, because they recognize, especially in a site like this, you're going to have the purple line open someday, very close. You have the red line, you have the George Avenue buses. This is an extremely well-located site. If this was an affordable housing project, we would typically see parking ratios probably in the 0.66 to 0.8 ratio per unit, parking spaces per unit. So we can easily accommodate that, and if you went in during a rezoning process and asked for that kind of variance, you might even get the Planning Commission talking to you about even lowering that, which you really need to do some market research at that point. But you know, it'd be easily done. So I'm going to now show you the similar project, just so you get a sense for what something like this could feel like, and see what types of units. What I'm going to show you is 100% affordable. It's done through the same kind of process, funding-wise, that this project would be done through county housing funds, through low-income housing tax credits, through using state funding that's targeted specifically to these types of units. And I know your pastor is very active and well-connected with the county government and is helping push forward the use of church lands throughout the county. Amazingly enough, to brag for a moment, we just passed 100,000 units of development in my office's career. So we built 100,000 multifamily units. Now I've lost the reason I was bragging. Now I've forgotten why I was bragging. But anyhow, so let me go to this other presentation and show you what this could be like. Questions? So this is called Spring Flats. It's on Spring Street in DC. And it's actually just won 2 national awards. And it's very similar to your potential project. So it's about a 4-acre site that sits between 13th and Georgia Avenue, Georgia Avenue. And there was an existing historic building abandoned. It was a Hebrew home for the aged. And then the rest of the site had a small school, and 10th Street had been taken over. It had never been completed as a public road, and there was a parking lot for this school and for a rec center that exists right here. And so this was a competitive process, and our team was lucky enough, our team of developer, contractor, and architect was lucky enough to do this for the city. And so what we did, I hate this program. Was look at renovating the existing building, working with the scale of the existing building, just like we're going to need to do here. Looked at creating a multifamily building over here, tearing down the old school element, which actually was abandoned as well. As part of this, we actually returned 10th Street to a public street, and then had attached embedded townhomes that actually have garages that are connected to what is an underground garage under this entire building. And then there's a plaza that's created on top, which creates a really beautiful space between the buildings. So, similar height and scale issues. You can see how we actually modulated along 10th Street the building so that it doesn't look as large as it could be. That's the historic building completed. That was turned into affordable senior housing, independent senior. That's a view of the corner where you can see the new townhomes, which relate to townhomes across the street, the mid-rise building, which townhomes are embedded into, and even how we took in the mid-rise building and we modulated that to, again, make the apparent height, because it's actually 6 stories tall, lower to the neighbors. And you can see how 10th Street slopes up and you lose a story on 10th. But what I want to really get to is some of the inside. So this gives you an idea of some of the spaces in the common spaces. You know, what we try to do in a building, if you're doing a mid-rise building, say, you don't want to have just all your public spaces in one spot. You try to move and create them throughout the building so that people on various floors start to collaborate and get to know each other. You know, one of the hard things is to get people to come out of their unit. It's very hard to learn about your neighbors, even in a single-family neighborhood. There's some of the units. Everything's very modern and open in these things, even though this was an historic building. The level of finish in an affordable building is, as we do probably at this point, 70% affordable and 30% market rate. It used to be higher market rate, but there's a downturn in the market rate right now. But the units are as nice or nicer, and they actually have to be bigger. To be competitive, to get tax credits, they want you to build reasonably sized family housing. It should not be a unit, it should be a home. And in the unit counts that I was talking about for the mid-rise building, that included things as small as efficiencies, which is the supportive housing, 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4-bedroom units in that unit count. This is the view, again, this is the daytime view of the corner that I mentioned earlier and how it modulates, and we tried to break the scale up, and you can see how it works with the surrounding community. We did a lot of analysis with them. One of the interesting things was they actually sat a little bit high, like actually the houses across First Street even sit higher than First Street. And so there's even some opportunity of grade change there. So again, this is the plaza that's on top of the garage. So that space between the buildings where we have the drop-off area could become a beautiful outdoor amenity space, even though we might be on top of a parking podium. Really nice kitchen areas and common room areas for everybody. One of the big great rooms. And then these are 2 over 2 townhomes. And because our site sits up and because of the way the grades work here, the first story is actually, the lowest level is actually the bedrooms, and they're embedded down into the ground, which would be something that could happen here. And you come up, and so that cornice line along here is the differentiation between a unit and a unit. It just gives you an idea of the scale that you could have. So that's really, I don't want to go through the whole package, but it gives you an idea of how these things could be done. I hope that's been informative. I hope you have questions.
What was the parking requirement for that?
Right next to right off the Petworth Metro Station. So we're at 0.33 spaces per unit. A third of a space for every unit, because of the affordability as well as the proximity to Metro. One thing that happens here, and that's why intergenerational housing may be of interest, seniors have a lower parking ratio in most jurisdictions than families.
Michael, is what you're envisioning on the First Avenue graded, the modulated look somewhat like this, what we're seeing now, the rows? So in other words, that's at 3 stories, understanding you have 1 floor below that, so essentially it's 4. But is your sense that this is the look, similar sort of floor numbers on First Avenue?
This is massing-wise and potential height-wise, yes. This dark red brick responds to the community, but we'd want to work. In most cases we would probably modulate this a little bit more, but because everything across the street is an identical townhome, we wanted to respect that. But yes, and then the interesting thing here is, we've got it's like a small patio down below. It's about 7 feet wide. In the case of First Street, the way the grades work and the way we would set things back, we could have a nice wall right at the property line that drops down, and then we could have 15 feet of entry space that would be the front yard for those units.
Two questions from online. The first is the desire to reduce traffic on First Avenue because of kids playing in the street. And I think, try to answer some of that. There's a lot of walkers, bikers, children that are on First Avenue. People are out in their yards. We don't want people cutting off of Georgia because, of course, we know Georgia is a place where people go to lose their religion during traffic hour. We don't want people cutting through into the neighborhood and disrupting the neighbors. So that's the answer to that. The second is, what does the entrance on Ballard Street lead to? And the answer is that it leads to our fellowship hall. There are stairs there, but that is a space that we already know is very easily converted into accessible space. It's a set of 4 stairs down from the entrance into the fellowship hall, down into the fellowship hall, and in fact there's already a ramp there that goes down into our kitchen, which we now have to use to let people down there if they have devices that they need to use.
I have like 5 questions. Did you say on First Avenue, across the street is 3.5 stories? Is that what you said?
Houses, no. In the way grades work, if this was townhomes, well, actually, as embedded townhomes, it would read as only 2/3 of a story because of the way the grades work. Because they're only 2 stories tall, so they would be about at the eave height. The roof of those would be about at the eave height of the homes across First Street.
How do you ensure that people that move into affordable housing, I assume there's some income component to that, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Once they're housing, how do you ensure that it remains affordable housing and that people who are then exceed the incomes, is that working better? Yeah.
Yeah.
How do they ensure that it remains affordable housing and not people that just move in and stay forever and then not become affordable housing anymore? And my last question is, I'm still unclear about traffic on First Avenue, because if you're coming north on Georgia, you either turn in Ballard, right, or you just cut. Let's say you're coming from the district, you would come up, turn on Spring Street, and come right down First Avenue, correct? That'd be the only way in, or the fastest way in, right?
Yes, and one of the things that I was retaining, and all of this is just speculative at this point, was this connection right here. Mostly I was saving that because fire access. You need to make sure that the fire trucks that come into a site can make it through the site and articulate correctly. But that would be something where we would talk to people to see if they really, if that exit was closed, then you would have to enter the church through here and potentially with a connector through here. There would be no circulation off of First Street if we closed that. But again, that's going to be a process and a discussion with the community. So Rick, you can help me on this. I do the architecture on these things, and I don't understand the financing totally, but there is income checking every year.
Well, in the financing agreements for the tax credits and financing, you'll be required for at least 40 years affordable housing at certain rent levels and below. Good question about what happens if incomes go up. It's rare, but it does happen. You're allowed, if you go over the max rent, you're allowed to go a certain percentage over for a certain period of time. I don't know the exact numbers. And after that, you will have to find another place to live. And it's then rented to another tenant who is at or below the required levels. They do give you a little grace period if your income does shoot up, but not too long.
And then for affordable home purchase, typically what happens is that land goes into a separate trust or it's leased separately, so that as people, when a house is sold, explain this for us, Rick. When a house is sold, the owner, let's say it's at Connecticut, because we're doing this over Randolph Road, has first right to buy, and then sells, has an agreement with the church to sell it back at a rate that's identified as affordable by the county. Typically that's set by average median or area median income, AMI, at 80%, right?
Correct.
So area median income for Montgomery County this year was $120,000 for family. So it's 80% of that. And if you're purchasing for something like Manatee, you're typically going to be no interest mortgages at all, right? So that's how they're able to get people to affordable purchase.
Couldn't have said it better. Absolutely right.
They try to make it so that you can't make a killing because the market's gone way up, because even when you sell it, it's set by the rent or the income restrictions, which sets the values.
What I understand, it is only rental. No, you cannot buy it out, because in Loudoun County, the lower affordable housing, you can buy it, you have to live there for 3 years, and then you can sell it. Once it's yours, you can sell it at market price.
In these concepts, I've shown all of the low scale as potential home ownership, where you can buy the units. There's even a potential in a mid-rise building to have a portion of it be condominiumized, where you could actually buy individual units within that building. It creates some complications, but we've done it on numerous projects, and I think so has Rick.
I don't understand it exactly. You can buy it and then sell it at market price after 3 years?
Can't sell it at the market price, but
A ground lease, land lease. In other words, the congregation would still own the land and then essentially lease it to the home buyer. In the ground lease, you all can add additional rules on sale, etc., since you'll control it. So this is all to be determined, and we might be, this might be new unexplored territory with a land lease and for sale. But you'll be able, in the land lease, that the purchaser will have to be party to, set rules on sales price, etc. So.
but
Well, if I can interject just as a member. So just as a member of the vision team, this has been a topic of conversation, like what it should look like. So actually, I really invite you to come to some of these listening roundtables because that's the kind of thing we've been talking about. So bringing it up is really important and valuable to like how do we as a congregation decide? Because I'll be honest, no offense, Rick and Michael, but we actually get to decide that as a congregation. Like if we decide to go with this project, we can say we want the potential for home ownership, affordable home ownership to look like this program. But we're not at the point, unfortunately, like it's cool to think about like how we could discern, but we're just not at that point because I'll be honest, I don't have the mental capacity to make those decisions until, as a congregation, we decide to do this. Well, that's not, no. The short answer is no. We would not do that. We would not be landlords. The
So,
land.
Dirk, let me encourage you to go back online and watch our financial presentation from last week and the social presentation where we answer a lot of these questions. Yeah. So a lot of those questions are answered there. But basically what happens is we as a congregation, should we choose to move forward, will empower a building committee. That committee will be the group that works alongside any future development partners to set the rules that you're asking about, using the information that we've gathered from these listening roundtables to be the guardrails for the vision. At the end of that, once the bricks and mortar are built, because we want to ensure that we're not breaking the rules for those LIHTC credits that we sold, those low-income housing tax credits, there's a third-party management company, typically a reputable, sometimes multinational company, that's brought in to manage the property. So we're not, fixing toilets and replacing windows. That's the management company's job. The income off of the project is what's paying for that. So the church is not financially responsible for maintaining or caring for the building. And we're receiving some portion of the income off the building, probably a very small portion, on an annual basis. The financial benefit to the church, because we're going to ground lease property if we do this, we can't sell it, we would ground lease it, is at closing, when everything is signed, we're going to get an upfront ground lease payment based upon the number of units we develop. And so that payment could be as low as $600,000, it could be multiple millions of dollars, all depending upon the kind of project we develop. That money then is what's considered capital money. We can't use it, we can invest it and set a policy where we're using investment proceeds for ministry, but that big chunk of money has to be used for capital projects here in our building. What's that? It is not taxable, no. It's not, yep. Yeah, it's not, but it's not taxable, no.
Land lease is not common in Montgomery County at all. Land lease was common in Baltimore, and sort of they're trying to get rid of it. So I'm just curious about your research into land lease for the property.
That is almost universally the way that churches go through this process. So if you were to go up the street to Hughes United Methodist Church, just up the way, they already have an affordable housing building on their property that was ground leased. So it may not be the most common. I mean, a lot of the affordable housing development right now in Montgomery County isn't happening on properties owned by houses of worship. But I think and I know of at least 7 other projects that are in the works right now across the county, all of them are ground lease projects. So.
I want to thank you, and you all have our contact information. Will can bring any questions you might have to our attention, and we'd love to continue the process and help you understand your potentials. Thank you.
And friends, if you would like a tour of the building to kind of understand some of the spaces that we're talking about, I'm going to be right at the back. I'll wait for about 5 minutes, and then we'll take a walk around.